Maybe. Good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, the 13th of, 13th February of 20, yeah, you know what I mean. 13th February. Brain not work yet. Something like that. I hope you can hear and see me. Let's see. Stream has started. That sounds good. I can hear myself. That also is a very good thing. How are you guys doing? So, yeah, good morning, everybody. It's time to do the 2 sprints, 45 minutes, the usual stuff, right? And talk a bit about whatever is going on. I have some emails to read and some messages to reply to during the first sprints. And then I'm going to try to be somewhat more productive with the writing and so forth in the second sprint. We'll see how all of that goes. I may have to... Hey! Perfect laugh track. I hope you're having a good day. I assume I don't know which time zone you're in, so I don't know if a good morning is the correct way to address this. Yeah, so I may have to do like a phone call with my sister to find out what is going on with our mother, who is in the hospital for pneumonia, which is not necessarily a good thing, to put it mildly. And depending on how things go, I may have to jump on a train and go to where my mother lives, because, someone has to look after the cat and all of that stuff. So we'll see how that goes. It's all a bit, chaotic. But that's something we'll find out during the first sprints. Yeah, I have continued reading my so far very interesting Blood and Mistletoe by Ronald Hutton. I've learned a lot about 17th and 18th century attitudes towards druids, which is really cool. And yeah, that I guess I will continue. Although today, finally, the Summer of Fire and Blood book comes out, so I can learn more about the German Peasants' War, or update my knowledge of the German Peasants' War. 2 a.m. Yeah, in that case, good morning, and thanks. Yeah, so Blood and Mistletoe, so far really interesting. Fun thing is always like I've reached this point, and that's where a lot of the things that I know sort of like intersect in weird places, where I read a book about the druids and suddenly people like John Toland obviously show up because he wrote about the druids. I kind of knew that at the back of my head. But I had to read John Toland's Christianity Not Mysterious, which is a book he wrote on deism. And that was burned in public by the public hangman in Dublin for being unchristian. So I had to read that for my attempted PhD in philosophy of religion, and suddenly that guy crops up in a book about druids that I'm reading more or less for fun. So I've reached that weird point where so many of my interests kind of intersect at unexpectedly intersect in all kinds of ways, which is interesting. Certainly something that I can see how people can fall into these traps of paranoia or conspiracism when you have all of these sort of like synchronicities show up unexpectedly. Hey, Demidrag Hayward, how are you doing? I'm okay. I still have a bit of a cold. It has moved into that stage where it's just it's a cough, and you have to get up all that phlegm that is sort of in your lungs, and I'm working through that, but I feel okay. Hopefully it'll be all gone by, I guess, Monday or so. As I said, like Monday, no sprints, because I have to go to the dentist at 9 a.m., which is way too early, but and maybe after that I can go straight to the gym from the dentist. Yeah, nothing could go wrong. So how did your presentation for the job go that you had today? I assume you had that today, right? I hope it went good. Hello, Britain. How are you doing? Yeah, I'm feeling all right. It's good. Takes a while, but I mean that's like the thing, right? With the cold, I usually get like about one per winter, and it's fine, right? It just happens. Certainly, washing my hair and running out into like plus 2 degrees Celsius, and standing at like a protest for like 2 hours in that temperature with like wet hair was not exactly the smartest move I've made in my life. It also wasn't the dumbest, right? Just to be clear. But I have one of those per year, and a cold is usually fairly harmless, and you just like have to wait because there's nothing you can do beyond wait. Drink a lot of fluids, usually tea, not just black tea. Keep warm and wait for it to pass, and that's all you can do because And I'm at the stage where I think it's depending on how things go, I could probably go back to the gym tomorrow, or I would feel confident in doing it tomorrow. Maybe I'll, depending on whether I, go visit my mother tomorrow or today, I'll, um, leave it until Monday. We'll see. Well, I'm glad it went well, but that I think is like one of those things we often underestimate. It's like, and there's usually these two versions, right? Like either you're good at like presenting on like in front of an audience where you kind of switch into this different mode and then it kind of works, whereas the rehearsal works poorly, or there's the opposite where you just like freeze and nothing works once you're in front of an audience. So I'm glad it's the former one for you. I mean, there is that old saying for like musicians in orchestras or like actors in theater productions that like the final rehearsal has to kind of go wrong because otherwise the premiere won't work. So I don't know if there's truth to that. It feels like one of those superstitions that are sort of like bandied about, but I can see how it may help because once things are go wrong in like your like rehearsal, you're like, well, it can't get worse than this, right? And that kind of leaves you some sort of like freedom of mind, I guess. Oh, well, I hope. I mean, obviously, this is a hobby thing, right? Like, if you don't feel it right now, then taking a break makes totally sense. A total sense. I hope it works, and I hope it's not just frustration or anything of the sorts, and you're okay with that, Britain, right? I certainly not always fun to do stuff on BookTube and engage with BookTube and all of that, and especially if you're like emotionally invested and think of other booktubers as your friends and all of that, right? It can get a bit tough. Also, like feeling the need to put up videos every day or every other day or whatever you're working on, right? I can see that pressure sort of like rising, especially if you have like go to college or something and you have like the usual like exam period and shit coming up. So I hope taking a break will help sort of like reset your brain and everything. Yeah, exactly. I hope that works out for you, Britain, and so forth. Are you still? I still have to watch your video. I know you tagged me in the video about comic books, but that was like 3 a.m. this morning or something. So I'm gonna watch it maybe during the first sprint, so I can find out what you recommended to me. Have you actually recorded the Fate of Fantasy one, or are you keeping that one as a larger project for after your break, Britain? I did see that Daniel Green response video, the 1 minute thing. I don't know what to say about it. I did unlist. I did unlist my video for Breach of Peace for the time being. I felt that was like the best way of dealing with it, and I've shared Naomi's video on my community tab. I thought about making a video, and then I realized that right now that's not what I want to do, because it's easy to just sort of take attention away from the one person this should be about, or the main person this should be about, and beyond, like, hey, I believe them. This sure sucks. There's very little to say at the moment. I certainly have like larger thoughts about things around that, the whole thing with the way that Matt's fantasy book reviews made his dumb joke, the way Ben replied to that. There's a larger situation, a larger conversation to be had about BookTube reacting to this. But for that, I'm gonna wait until more people have reacted, and we see where this is going, and then we can talk about how this was inevitable. I mean, it wasn't inevitable that it was Daniel Green, but it was certainly something that was going to happen to BookTube, just like it happened to every other larger community, so-called community on YouTube in general. So it was just a matter of time. The question is like usually how you deal with that, and I think there's something to be learned there. We'll see how that goes, but that's something I want to wait for a bit to go there. Hey, Kale, how you doing? Nice. You're not missing much. He just says like the allegations are false. He will prove that, and he will sue Naomi King, and that's that. No apologies. It was just like a quick statement. It's like, hey, stay tuned. We'll have more stuff coming later. And I mean, yeah, like if he has actual proof or whatever, then sure, go ahead. And that's the thing, like, right. I thought about, like, in my community post, I said like, well, I'll either link Naomi's video under the in the description or pinned comment or whatever for the Breach of Peace video, and then I thought about it. It's like, well, it is not, Breach of Peace is not that important a work, right? Like I have one video. Still need to do that, right? I have one video on Neil Gaiman book that was his Norse mythology back in the day, and what with Neil Gaiman being Neil Gaiman and so forth, I feel that unlisting that one doesn't feel right. I think they're linking, say, the Vulture article or New York Magazine or wherever it was, that one that came out a couple of weeks ago, and but just like pinning that in the description feels the right way to go. But I think I've always said that it's like a case by case situation how to deal with that stuff. I did link the sort of allegations against China Mieville in the description for the whatever it was called, the Book of Elsewhere, for context as well. So I think it's a case by case thing. And Daniel Green's first novella is not the kind of essential thing that needs to be out there for context, I think. I did not know that he worked in politics, and I did not know for which party either. The thing is, that joke was really bad. I can see the thought process behind it, and it's the kind of joke that sort of probably works in a small circle with your friends where, yeah, but it's not something you should put up in public. And as someone who is clearly aware of what they do and how to, I mean, his channel is fairly large, or used to be fairly large, and growing fast and so forth. As someone who knows how to present themselves in public, I was surprised that he did not think that one through enough. I mean, I know you already hated him for the Conan video, right, Britain? So, interesting enough, I did not think he was like working for the Republicans. I always thought he was sort of like Democrat aligned, but that might just be me misremembering him saying something on his Discord. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, Hey Tim. Yeah, as I said, it kind of works as it would work as a joke in a small group, or like as an in joke between friends, right? If you have the situation that people have always claimed that you haven't read the full series or whatever, if and everyone knows that kind of joke, you can make that sort of like as an in joke. It would still be tasteless, but the thing with like tasteless humor is that it kind of works in, all kind of humor is referential, right? Like, and if you are in a if everyone knows where you stand and everyone knows what you're talking about, you can do things. But like putting something up on the internet means that it's in public, and I think that's something that a lot of people still are learning, especially older people. It's like you go. I used to hang. You obviously have. I mean, I still have sort of like a lot of to do with heavy metal musicians, especially American heavy metal musicians who were started their bands in the 80s, and they're like, well, obviously they're boomers, right? So a lot of them hang out on Facebook, and if you're organizing concerts and if you're sort of engaging with that kind of crowd, you have to be on Facebook, and you see what those people said during both the 2020 elections and the whole pandemic. A lot of people said a lot of incredibly dumb shit, and some of them went so far that they felt consequences on Facebook. I know it's surprising, and one guy, I'm not naming names here because it doesn't really matter, right? I got a lot of shit for what he said on in public and complaining about like being censored and all of that kind of stuff. And I met him with his band in person at a festival where they were playing in a year later, and we had a long conversation. And uh, what I realized is that he thought that that he completely missed the fact that if he says something on a public profile and has the settings set to public on Facebook, right? He's basically screaming something on Main Street on a public square, basically, and that's a very different thing from saying something to his friends. And he was always talking about using gay as as a bit of an insult, calling something gay. It's like, well, but I have so many gay friends, and it's totally, we always use that. And it's like, yeah, that's your friends, and they obviously know that you're not homophobic or not like aggressively homophobic. Like all men over a certain age do have like a level of homophobia, right? Like your friends know that kind of stuff. It's totally fine. It's like, yeah, I don't want to insult anyone. I don't want to be mean to gay people. It's just like how I was brought up, and I thought people knew that. It's like, no, man, you don't. And I think that's a switch that especially people over, say, I don't know, 30, sort of still need to figure out, because while people over 30 up to like I get 40, 45, right? We grew up with the internet becoming the internet, but we did not grow up with like ubiquitous social media, the way that younger people have grown up. And that difference between or the fact so a lot of people still make that difference between something that happens online doesn't happen, it is different for separate and lesser than something that happens offline, and that separation doesn't exist for all practical purposes anymore. And I think some people kind of miss that. Hey Apollo, how you doing? Yeah, as Burton said, I thought it was a Democrat, but I don't know. Like he said something about his work around the election, so and from that context, I kind of, but yeah. No, it doesn't matter much if you're like. There's a very conservative part of California, of course. Um, I mean, that's one of the things you learn when you read Palo Alto by Malcolm Harris, which I still recommend. It's a really good book if you want to see how so much of the tech industry has turned to the right and has always gone down that road sooner or later. And I think it's, yeah. But yeah, it was edgelordy, and that's like the main things. Like, don't be an edgelord in public if you can help it. Yeah, like the whole like Matt's thing was already done by the time I woke up, so I managed to not watch that, which is, I think, in hindsight, a good thing. Well, I mean, Kale, you have had a big head start there. Well, I've furthest south I've been, I guess technically Israel. Yeah, well, that's the furthest south I've been. Says a lot. Furthest north I've been has been Iceland, though. Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. That was like that was very unfortunate because I said like, hey, I did like sort of like the direction that Daniel's channel was taking, and 2 days later that thing came out, and I'm like, oh fuck, shouldn't have said that, should I? But obviously, how could you know, right? That's like one of the things that I feel like is important, because one thing that I saw immediately happen, and it always frustrates me with these kind of things, is the as soon as it happens, something like that comes out, there's going to be a lot of people go like, well, he always gave me these off vibes. I always kind of knew something was wrong. It's like, no, you didn't. You just didn't like the dude. That's not the same thing. And while it is important to trust your guts, coming out after something like that goes and like, well, I knew it, feels so self-congratulatory and so weirdly smug in a way, when that's most likely not the truth. I mean, obviously trust your guts, but the dark issue about all of this is, of course, that you know you can't tell. That's kind of the point. Yeah, I got somewhat agitated there. Sometimes happens. I don't think so. I mean, he's made a 1 minute video where he just says that he has proof that all of this is wrong. These are allegations, like false allegations, and so forth. And he'll sue Naomi, and we'll see how all of that goes. So I assume, if that is not just another empty threat, then that will mean that I guess everyone will see all the things, and then we'll see, and we'll find out. Really frustrating, of course, but there's no good way out of something like that. This in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, I, th- I totally get that, and I think that's kind of what I want to talk about when I make that video on BookTube. I think there is a level of sort of like performative wholesomeness with BookTube that I guess we kind of need to think about. It's something I've spoken about before when I said there are responsibilities for booktubers. We kind of, as a community, booktube needs to grow up in a way, because we are part of this whole creator economy, and there are certain things that happen in that space with that we have so far sort of like swerved past or ignored in a lot of ways. And I think that time is over, and understanding what we are doing, at least, once you reach a certain, size of audience or reach or whatever, right, is something that we need to sort of like just be aware of and be figure out how to do those kind of things. Like other communities on YouTube do have sort of like developed sort of like mechanisms or ways of dealing with the negative aspects of this, like with creators, starting drama, with creators doing all of these, doing horrible things, with creators just being insincere. All that's like we other communities have developed that, and I feel BookTube has not, or at least the sort of like adult fantasy booktube side of things has not yet developed that, and has always gone like, no, 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 look, we're all friends here, we're not doing anything, we're doing it not for the money, we're doing it just for the love of the books, and we're all friends, and let's keep it positive, and let's keep politics out and all of that. And you can only do that for so long, and once you are like, in the channel size of, say, Murphy Napier, or Daniel Green or whatever, like once you're over 100,000 subscribers, you have like serious heft and serious power in a community, and that goes in all kinds of, that comes with a lot of like negative things. And like one aspect of like why there is so much sort of like incredibly fucked up behavior by a lot of YouTubers in particular, and obviously TikTokers and so forth, like content creators in particular, I think, is that a lot of people started their sort of like YouTube or like their social media career very, very young, and became relatively, for the circles they're moving or whatever, incredibly famous, powerful, big, or whatever you want to call it, in incredibly quickly. And that does not necessarily work really well when it comes to sort of keeping yourself in check and keeping your head level in a lot of ways. And I think that's, you know, that I think is something that we find out, because we'll find out more and more about is in those kind of situations. And Daniel Green, I think, is a perfect example for that, because I don't know when he started his channel. Like maybe he was 20 or something, like super young, right? Suddenly you have like 500,000 or 300,000 subscribers, and you're big, and you have fans that come up to you. And if you're like navigating that space and understanding that there is a power dynamic and all of that crap, right? That takes time. And I think a lot of people didn't have that, because we're, as a whole, social media influencers and so forth, social media users are still figuring out how to navigate that space, how to, go from like the full-on parasociality, where you have like, movie stars, TV stars, or whatever you don't interact with, to the sort of semi-parasocial. They're still figuring out terms for that, like with YouTubers or TikTok stars or whatever, where there is a feedback channel, right? Where you can talk to me and I will talk back to you in a way that would not be possible if this were television, right? But once you have like the size of 100,000 subscribers, that is still not possible. And even though it feels more personal and direct, there is still sort of like a barrier there. And I think that's something we're still figuring out. You're right about that, Britton. It has been a kick to the balls in just like every possible way. Morning, Chris. How you doing? Yeah, I understand that. Like, I mean, that's kind of the thing with like escapism, and there's parts of the left that kind of go like, well, there's no thing like escapism. I think that's wrong. I think people need escapism. I think we need to be more conscious about when we do escapism and when we step out of the escapist thing, and need to be aware of the fact that escapism can only just be something we do to sort of like recharge our batteries to then go back into the world and do, face the world. That I think is an important aspect. Yeah, it is very much appalling. I agree. All right, guys, it's half past. We've been talking for half an hour instead of like the usual 15 minutes. I would switch into sprints now for 45 minutes so I can catch up with my sister to find out what's going on with our mother and make plans for the rest of the day and do all the other stuff that I usually do during sprints. And I'll be back in 45 minutes. That is a quarter past the hour. And then we'll talk some more and see how this is going. And I am back. How did you all do? Did you get shit done? I sure hope so. All right. Wow. Y'all been busy while I was away. All right. Hey, Chantel. And yeah, you're right. It's super fucking late for you as well. How are you doing today? Yeah, don't we all? That's what weekends are truly made for, sleeping. That sounds really cool, the full time on the road life. I hope that also goes well. And yeah, cool to see. Yep, I hear that you changed your name there. That's quite the trip there. Yeah. Yeah, I assume that is not a good choice right now with the job market. I think I guess depending on what kind of jobs, what kind of qualifications you have, there is always a chance of finding a new job, but that's a difficult thing to judge. Also, I guess it kind of makes sense. I feel for this specific thing, right? To wait a couple of months more to see, where all of this insanity that's currently all the volatility has maybe straightened out some, and we have like a better idea of how courts are going to judge specific things, how things are falling out there. I hate to say this because obviously everything is bad, and the decisions made by the current administration, U.S. administration, are insane in a lot of ways, and the way that say Elon Musk did all of this stuff with the department, all of that crazy shit, right? All of this is really really bad, but for a lot of effects, long-term effects for the job market and all these other things, I guess we still have to wait a couple of months to see how things sort of shake out, which sucks. And yeah, I hope your leg is fully healed up because yeah, that's like one of the things that you notice when you are getting older, right? Is like stuff that kind of healed within like a couple of days when you were a kid takes longer to heal. Like everything just goes slower because your body cells grow slower and all of that stuff, right? But yeah, healing wounds takes a lot longer, I guess. Yeah, yeah, it's very late for you out there. I know that. Hello. Wonderful. I hope work will not be too stressful and too frustrating. Yeah, I had like I mean, we now know in which part of the hospital she is, so it's not in like ICU or anything of the sort. It's just like a regular part, and my sister's going down there tomorrow, and I'll either go down there today or tomorrow to meet up with my sister, and we'll figure out how things go, and from there, that's roughly the plan for now, and I hope things are good. It's one of those weird things where pneumonia is nothing to joke about, of course, and it's certainly something she's had before, and let's hope for the best, right? It's one of those things that don't get easier the older you get. No, I mean nothing is truly far in Germany. It's something like somewhere between 2.5 and 3 hours by train, depending on how much time I have or like I need changing trains. That's kind of the main thing. By car, it's like about 2 hours. But since I don't have a car, obviously, train it is, and that's 2 hours plus changing time in Frankfurt, and that's not too bad, right? It's something I can do on fairly short notice because those local trains, it's local trains, and local trains go every hour, and you don't have to reserve a seat or anything in advance. You can just like step up to the platform and take the next one. So it's something I can do on very short notice and with reasonable, in reasonable time, and even go there like in the morning and come back in the evening if that's what is necessary. So it's fine. I have not met Maton Books in Berlin because I have not been in Berlin long enough. I've changed buses there last year when I went to Poland, but I haven't been in Berlin since before the pandemic. And Matt did his started his channel like during the pandemic. So in that time, since I know Matt, I haven't been to Berlin, so I have not met him in Berlin. We almost met here where I live because when he started his channel, he had like a work trip planned to Marburg where I live, and that work trip got cancelled, and we were already planning to hang out and have a beer or something, but that got cancelled. So I mean, if or when I go back to Berlin for whatever reason, and surely it'll happen, right? It's not out of the ordinary. Like if there's time, sure, I'll gladly hang out with him. I have never read or watched Ready Player One. Yeah, that was kind of tight because it was like I could feel that the pot was getting empty, and I'm like, will it fit? Will it fit? Will it fit or not? And yeah, get lucky there. Matt's yeah, now official nationality, I really don't know because he's like partly Australian. He grew up in Australia and in America, so I don't know what his citizenship is. And he has lived in Germany for a long time now. So yeah, I don't know what his citizenship is, but part Australian, part American, and now living in Germany. I mean, German trains are a thing. Like on the one hand, we do still have a fairly robust sort of like public transport system. Don't get me wrong; it's still okay. It goes well. It, there's trains to most places. There's buses to other places. Like you can get around Germany pretty well. Most parts of Germany, at least, unless it gets to the super rural areas, you can get around with public transport without a car in one way or another. The further out you get, of course, the harder it gets. But like with in the sort of like more urban areas, it's fairly solid. The problem is, of course, that the German train system Deutsche Bahn, which was a state-owned company, right? Was run by the state until the 90s, during the big neoliberal push of the 90s of privatizing everything, was supposed to be privatized. And that never fully happened. So it's a semi-private business in a lot of ways. It's super weird. It has to operate according to a private business, but it's still sort of like semi-funded by the state if it needs money, and is thus dependent on, whoever wants to put money in it. And the problem is that, like, infrastructure and public transport, I would argue, is infrastructure is not something you can run as a for-profit organization. That's not how that works. Especially if you wanted to, work as actual infrastructure, because running trains to rural areas will not necessarily be profitable, because that's not that many people, but it's a service that you kind of provide. So if you fund it by tax money, then you need to make sure that it actually fulfills that sort of that function. And because you, on the one hand, kind of run it by tax, still, finance it with tax money, or at least when it comes to building up track and refurbishing track and all of that stuff, you run it like that. But on the other hand, it supposedly has to be a for-profit corporation. There's a lot of stuff that did not get repaired. Obviously, since the 90s, you have this weird obsession with taking the national deficit, the deficit down, and saving money everywhere, which is not necessarily, something that states need to do, right? That's in a lot of ways. And a lot of infrastructure in Germany has been neglected in that regard. We have a lot of, like, even like highways, and although car infrastructure does get more money than train infrastructure, there's a lot of, like, highway bridges that are not necessarily in the best condition and need to be refurbished. And it's slowly being done, and there is more investment right now, and stuff is getting repaired. But because we did, like, basically 30 years, we did not repair anything and just let things rot for whatever reason, it now takes way more effort, possibly way more money, and certainly leads to a lot of stuff being, out of service and so forth than it would have had to be if, people had figured out that, infrastructure is not something you can run for profit in that regard. So German trains are not as punctual and so forth as they could be right now. It's certainly bad or worse than it was, but I can still go to Frankfurt, which is the next closest city, like twice per hour, and it takes about an hour to get there. So that's basically as quickly as it would be with a car, more or less. Like, cars maybe 10 minutes less or something like that. So who knows? But trains in general good, but have been made bad by, or not as good as they could be, through politics, of course. Um, the worst state or province of Germany, I would say it's probably, depending on what you're looking for. I think it's definitely one of the former GDR states, because obviously the after unification and adding stuff in there and putting reinvesting and converting it to capitalism and all of that, did go maybe slightly better than shock doctrine did go with, say, Russia, but it certainly didn't go fully well. And you have a lot of people back then just like moving to West Germany to get jobs and so forth. And in that regard, it's that entire area has certainly been blighted, which is one of the reasons why the AfD and the general right wing, and neo-Nazis and so forth have been so successful in those regions. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but if I had to guess, I would probably go with Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, which is up right the northeastern corner of Germany, like the Baltic coast all the way to the border to Poland and so forth, because it's very rural. It's has had a lot of people just leave to more urban areas, and has yeah, it's been always a very sort of like relatively thinly populated area, and stuff has just like basically been abandoned there in a lot of ways. And there's some attempts of building like tourist infrastructure there and shit like that, but I think that's probably the worst. Although, of course, it means that if you want to buy a house there, it's very very cheap. You can find really cool like full farmhouses and shit in parts of like Eastern Germany that are incredibly cheap. You probably would have to do like a lot of refurbishing and renovating and shit to get them back up, and you need to make sure that you have, say, internet access. But it's fairly cheap compared to, say, urban parts of, well, Berlin or like Western Germany in a lot of ways. Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on what you call how you define bad. If you define it on like as a with, say, if you look at like how the structural stuff is going on, poverty, all of that stuff, then I would argue it's Brandenburg is certainly not good either. Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, I would argue. Bavaria is fairly affluent and so forth in that regard, but its politics are very very twisted. It kind of depends on where you are there and so forth. So yeah, economically Bavaria is not bad, but in other ways it certainly is unique. Yeah, I thought more about infrastructure because, yeah, politically, yeah, Saxony or Thuringia would be politically also really bad, unfortunately. And yeah, Bavaria is, I don't know, Bavaria is it's really weird own thing, because if you go to, say, Munich, for example, it's a pretty cool place, and Würzburg, for example, is also like a really cool place in a lot of ways. And I feel like the contrast between rural and urban areas is probably the strongest in Bavaria in a lot of ways, right? That's kind of how I feel about Bavaria, because you go to like rural Bavaria somewhere in like the Upper Palatinate, or close to the Czech border, and stuff's wild there. Yeah, the Shining is certainly a really cool movie in that regard. There's stuff around it that I don't think is necessarily really good, but what I think about The Shining, what's interesting about The Shining is The Shining is proof that Stephen King uh, is good at writing books, but not necessarily at turning them into movies. And I know Stephen King really does not like the Shining movie, but then you watch the Shining TV adaptation from later that is much closer to the book, and it doesn't work as well. And you can see that sort of like that you need to sometimes you need to change things to make them work in a different medium. I feel like the Shining book versus movie versus TV adaptation are a really good way of showing how that is the case sometimes. Oh yeah, and I also just bought the audiobook for Summer of Fire and Blood, the history of the German Peasants' War, which is still like an awesome title for a book. I hope it lives up to my expectations. We'll see how that goes. Yeah. So, shall we do the next sprint and I can find out if I will have to travel today or tomorrow and how those things go? Obviously, if I yeah, I'm not a big fan of Stephen King either, Chantel. I don't like him that much. I think he's so here's the thing. Stephen King is a good storyteller. Like he can come up with really cool stories. He's not a good writer. He's not a good author. Like except for that one book where he tried really hard to, do prose and prose stylings and shit like that, which is, The Gunslinger. His books are just really not good to read. But there are often like really cool ideas in there, really cool stories in there. And that's obviously when, someone takes those and turns them into like a movie or whatever, you can take a lot out of them because the story kernels are really good. Yeah, I've never finished The Dark Tower yet. I will probably do so at some point, but yeah, I don't know. It's not like an author with my that is a priority for me. I think he's too American for me in a lot of ways. Like Stephen King, a lot of like at least his later stuff, I feel is very much built on like a specific sort of like small town American vibe in a lot of ways. Often like with tinged with a lot of nostalgia for small time America, which he then sometimes turns into horror that nostalgia and sometimes twists it in all kinds of ways. But there's always a certain level of nostalgia, and I have never been to America, and that whole sort of like emotional element that comes from having been to a small rural town that still feels like it's sort of like stuck in the 60s or 50s or whatever, right? All of that is missing. So a lot of the sort of emotional connection that I feel a lot of American readers have with Stephen King is just missing for me. So that's what I mean when I say he's too American for me. Well, I mean, also, I mean, at this point in his age, I think he's in his life. I think he can do whatever the fuck he wants at this point, and he certainly does, and that's good for him, right? I mean, it's nice to see a writer be very, very successful, monetarily successful, and all of that, and so far turn out to be like a fairly okay person in from what you can see how he presents himself in public and all of that, right? I mean, obviously he's had his like wild cocaine days and so forth, and he's spoken about that and all of that. Compared with some other incredibly successful authors, Stephen King seems to just be a very relaxed, or not maybe relaxed, but like a very regular dude in a lot of ways, and that's refreshing, unfortunately. He is a very wealthy boomer, but even for a boomer, he's still, compared to where some boomers have gone, I feel it's he's still, fairly solid. But I guess we're very much talking about very low bars here, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, what's interesting with King is like he was always sort of a liberal in a lot of ways, but he's certainly I don't want to say radicalized, but he's certainly amped up his rhetoric over the last couple of years in a lot of ways. And for someone who has built so much on nostalgia, it's nice to see that he understands that there's a difference between nostalgia and reactionary ideas in a lot of ways. So that's good for him. Okay, now I will. Let's do the sprints for another 45 minutes. If you go to sleep, which some of you probably should do, I wish you a good night, and I will let you know about sprints tomorrow in one way or another. As I already said, Monday no sprints because I'm at the dentist. But maybe there will be videos before then. I certainly want to talk about Revenger by Alistair Reynolds. I think maybe I can get some goggles for that one because it's still pirates, but it's also space pirates. Although I don't know if I. We'll see. It will still involve rum though. So yeah, let's do that, and I'll be back in 25 past. That sounds reasonable. Let's do it that way. And I am back. How are you guys doing? The remaining two. Oh, you did talk a lot when I left. Interesting. I'm glad you do that. That makes me very happy to see that people are, continuing to have a conversation. And yeah, I did get some stuff done. I finally read the email that I got yesterday, and then didn't want to open up because anxiety and shit. So I finally forced myself to read it, and it's all good. It's all a bit, one of those things when you break down and basically ghost everyone for a while, and that's partly of business related. Then any new email coming up can be incredibly scary, and you're like, oh god, do I still owe someone money that I forgot to pay, and so forth. And turns out that was not the case. They just want a piece of artwork, digital artwork they sent back in 2023, maybe two. They want that. They want to know if I still have that. Now I need to find out if I do. I'm pretty sure I do. So that's something I'll do in a moment. I'll go through my stuff. Yeah, go through hopefully my backups and find it so I can send it to them. Yeah. Now, if you make a channel for that, that would be really cool. I mean, obviously, it kind of depends on how you want to do that, right? And take videos and so forth, and just do regular like sort of like vlogging or uploads and stuff like that from time to time. But would be cool. Kale's Cabin does sound really good. I do agree, Kale. That's a really cool one. And yeah, Kale's Cabin does sound like something that I would probably go with. No, I think Kale's Cavern does work. I mean, one of the robot books by Isaac Asimov is called Caverns of Steel, so you have the fantasy and the sci-fi covered with that one. So also has that sort of like Batcave kind of vibe if you want to go down that road. That's a lot of work there and a lot of planning. But I mean, it's a big deal, right? It's a big project, and doing um, planning ahead is probably very helpful. And I think it's like one of those things that people don't necessarily realize that one way that disability sort of like affects all disabilities kind of affect stuff is that sometimes you need to plan ahead in ways that someone without any disabilities just don't have to. And it's like, yeah, I can probably just figure this shit out in when I'm getting there, and that's something that I mean, it's totally easy to overcome and all of that. Don't get me wrong, but it's certainly something that people need to. I feel we might sometimes have to communicate the fact that there is planning involved in a way that is not necessary for people that have like no sort of like restrictions on how they live. Something fascinating right now. So I was also reading a bit of the book on druids, and it talks about modern new orders of druids found in like the 18th and 19th century, which is when all people in Britain started forming secret societies and beneficial societies and all of that stuff. And there is one on Anglesey, which seems to be the first one, and it was like a charity kind of organization. So they paid dues, and like once per year they decided whom to give those things to sort of improve the island of Anglesey, and they donated to the hospital and all of those kind of things, which is really cool. Don't get me wrong. And one of the chief chief things they donated to was the Sanctuary for the Blind in Liverpool, and that is interesting, or one of those fun synchronicities, because that's where Brian Jakes worked when he started, where he worked to read books to blind people, which is where he started writing, first telling and then writing the Redwall books. So yet another weird coincidence. Just a fun bit to see where things are connecting in odd ways. Yeah. That's the point. Is like you need to, but it's very difficult because planning is not necessarily something that our brain is good at, right? Like there are people who are really good at planning and sticking to plans. I'm not one of them, and it's certainly a struggle and a big one sometimes. Which is the way I ended up in Athens, because I figured all would work out, and then came to the hotel and realized that my hotel reservation that I thought I had made hadn't happened. But luckily, in that case, I got lucky and knew the guy, the hotel owner. Is like, no, I still have a room somewhere, and it'll be fine. But it's yeah, it's more risky if you don't plan that way. Which is interesting because there's a part in Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor that I did not talk about in my video, because I already talked about way too many things. And obviously, the one of the main characters has a disability, right? She's paraplegic, and there's a situation where she does exactly that, like through a lack of planning, or and combined with that attitude that a lot of people with disability have, of like wanting to be self-reliant and all of that, gets herself in like a really a dangerous situation. And it does very much sort of resonate with me, and I assume a lot of other people in that regard, because it's it's just one of those risks that kind of come up from time to time. Well, good luck with that. I certainly hope, like, if you do that, let us know so we can all, subscribe to the channel and follow that adventure, because it sounds like a really cool thing. All right. It is something past 10:30 here. I will now proceed to doing life things beyond the camera. Yeah, thanks everyone for hanging out. I had fun as always. I hope so did you. If I travel to my mother's place tomorrow, there will be sprints tomorrow morning. If not, I promise I will actually write an update on the community tab. I'm so bad at this. I'm sorry, but I promise I will. So thanks once again for hanging out, and see you hopefully tomorrow, and maybe I'll even manage to get some videos over the weekend. Who knows? It's all a bit fluid right now.